is to lift other people up and help them be the best version of themselves. He has performed to full houses on Broadway and at the Sydney Opera House and won awards as Asia's and India's best stand-up comedian and performed over 2,000 shows on stages that include full houses across the world. His autobiography titled Naked was launched at the Jaipur Literature Festival, and he loves lifting people up and performing for terminally ill patients as well in their hospital rooms. I'm talking about Papa CJ. Please welcome him with a huge round of virtual applause.
Hi, Simerjeet. Thank you for having me here.
Hey, CJ, thank you so much for making it. We're really thrilled to have you. And what an exciting journey you've been on. I read your book, really impressive, and loads of takeaways, loads of similarities, unconventional in my journey and yours. A lot of unconventional decisions, a lot of breaking the barriers, a lot of pranks. And by the way, when you interview somebody like CJ, you must do your research because this is what he did. And I read from his book. 2009, he was doing a show in Chandigarh when a naive journalist who had not done her research called him and said, "You know what, my editor has asked me to do an interview with you, but I don't know who you are and what you do." This is the book I'm talking about, by the way. And so he pulled a prank, and a very good one.
I can tell you this story.
Yeah? Well,
yeah, basically this woman
ahead.
called and she said, "My editor has told me to interview you and I have no idea who you are."
Uh-huh.
So I told her that I'm a professional pole dancer. And she said, "What?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to be doing pole dancing at the Chandigarh Golf Club." This lady interviewed me for 25 minutes about pole dancing.
Uh-huh.
She called back with clarification questions, which I gave her.
Right.
And the next day, 3 newspapers wrote about how I was going to do stand-up comedy at the Chandigarh Golf Club. And this lady had on the front page of the newspaper an article titled "Poles Apart." And yeah, that's the article you have there.
Right. Oh my goodness. Poles apart. Papa CJ has no qualms about pole dancing, and so you pulled a. So you know, one better be careful when having an interview with you is to do your research. I've done mine, and I'd like to dive straight into it. CJ, you had a very comfortable job back in the UK. You graduated from a very good job with IBM, I believe, was one of your first employers.
Yes.
And you graduated from one of the best B schools in the world. You know, the version of the golden version of the Indian middle class dream. You had it all, and then you gave it up for stand-up comedy. Tell us more about, you know, what prompted it, why such a major risk, and what's in it for those who are waiting on the fence right now. They want to pursue their passions, but they don't.
Okay, there's quite a few different questions in there. I want to clarify one thing though, that I've learned that middle class means something different in India to what it means in some other countries. So in the UK, middle class means you're quite well off, but in India, middle class does not mean that. It's closer to what working class is in places like the UK. You know, you said I was quite comfortable in this job. I would beg to differ with you in that from the outside, I was very comfortable. You know, I was supposedly in this, you know, we grew up in a culture which tells us you do your schooling, you do your college, you get a postgrad degree, you get married, you have 2 children,
Kids.
and then you're so to say settled, right? And that's the formula. And if you follow that track, then you're so to say successful. But the problem is we grow up chasing a definition of success that has been defined by other people.
True.
Or that has been defined by society. And too many of us get in a situation where we've realized this so-called dream, and you realize that you're not so happy. With regard to people, you know, pursuing their passion, it's very fashionable nowadays to say, "Oh, pursue your passion, follow your heart."
Yep.
Passion doesn't necessarily put food on the table.
Absolutely.
So I believe there is a balance you need to find in that. Yes, you want to feed your soul, but you need to feed your stomach as well. I mean, today, if you look at Shah Rukh Khan, who is one of the biggest superstars in the Indian Bollywood industry, even he dances at weddings, right? So I think there is a rites of passage with every artistic profession. There's some things you do to feed the soul, and there's some things you do because you just need to bring in the money that allows you to do the activities that feed the soul.
Sure.
With me, what happened was I spent 4 years working in a consulting firm in London. I was able to pay back all my student loans.
Right.
And then I took a year off. And I went to the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland.
Right.
And I saw somebody doing stand-up comedy for the first time. And I was blown away. I mean, here's a guy on stage. He's got a microphone in one hand, a beer in the other, and he's just having fun. And that's
having the
his
time
job.
of his life.
And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I've got to do this. So I chucked up my job. I did 250 shows in 10 months.
Right.
At the end of it, I was completely broke. Because the way it works is you wake up at 10:30, 11. You cook one meal for yourself at 2 in the afternoon.
Right.
You get into some comedian's car to go to some city in the UK. You're traveling 3 or 4 hours. You get there, you do the show. You're nervous, so you don't eat. Sometimes you can't afford to because the pub is expensive.
Right.
You get dropped off on the outskirts of London at 2 o'clock in the morning. You pay the driver your share of petrol. You're not getting paid for any of these shows. And you change 3 different buses to get home, sometimes waiting for 45 minutes in cold London winter.
Well, I've done that too, but not for shows. I've done that for leisure and clubbing and other things in London, but not for a living.
And you get home at 4:35 in the morning. By the end of that year, you have no money, no friends, no relationships, and no life. But every single comedy promoter in the country knows your name.
Right.
So that's kind of how it started out. But I need to... And then, of course, after a year, I went broke and I took a job. I used to work in the day. I used to perform at night. I used to work for this recruitment firm. And, nowadays it's fashionable to say, oh, I'm hustling. What I used to do is I used to go to restaurants and they have this little bowl where you can put in your business card. And, at the end of the month, one will get pulled out. You get a free meal or something.
Right.
When nobody was looking, I used to steal those business cards, cold call these guys, place them into jobs and get commissions. Wow. And that's what allowed me to finance my comedy habit.
Oh, that's the definition of hustle then is.
Yeah, in fact, I remember when I used to go to airports, in those days you had these business centers in these airports where they had a few terminals and you could surf the internet. When nobody was looking, I used to go to every single terminal, open the browser, and change the homepage to papacj.com.
Of course, and that's what you've done today when you logged on for this interview. You got your Papa CJ and then in the brackets papacj.com, right? Never miss an opportunity to hustle. I love that entrepreneurial spirit. That's really powerful. I want to dig a little bit deeper, CJ, into the motivation, into the drive, into the risk taking, because a lot of people go through these experiences. They watch somebody doing what they would like to do for the rest of their lives. And they say, wow, look at this guy or look at this person. 2 aspects I want to take a deeper dive in. One is how it appears from the outside. Like your life, as you said, might appear different, like full of glamour and, doing, living the dream. And then the other side, as you mentioned, the nervousness, the anxiety, the travel, the odd hours, the not making enough money, the struggle behind. I want to talk about that a little bit. One. Second is people go through these experiences and then they don't follow through. They remain stuck. I don't know who said it, but there was this philosophical quote on the internet which said most people are leading lives of quiet desperation. And I think that's true for millions, especially in the corporate sector, right? They're stuck. They came with that energy and then somehow lost it along the way.
Simerjeet, you need to start reading some more cheerful stuff, man.
This is my way of.
Motivational speaker goes seeking misery so he can motivate those people. This is what you call market segmentation.
living through misery, experiencing it, witnessing it, seeing it around you, and then trying to figure out why is that people still choose to be in that misery. So without understanding the pain, there's no coming out of it. So talk to us about your story.
I'm pulling your leg, Simerjeet. I'm pulling your leg.
Sure. No, we're having a good time with this chat. So talk to us about your journey from those 2 aspects. One is how fame appears on the outside, and the other side of it, the struggle of it. And 2, the ability to jump for something, to go for something when your heart says, yes, this is you. You were meant for this.
I've never been drawn to fame per se. It just happens to be a byproduct of what I do. My motivation is, like you said at the start, is to make people feel better, to uplift them. And it translates, it manifests itself in multiple outlets.
Sure.
Whether it is stand-up comedy and making people laugh,
Uh-huh.
whether it's a little bit like what you do in terms of motivational speaking, whether it's executive coaching or corporate training and equipping people to realize their dreams, whether it's going into hospitals and making patients laugh. This was
I saw the videos. I saw the videos.
Pre-COVID. And sometimes it's just, I put out an offer saying if somebody needs to have a conversation. In fact, I've currently posted a concept called the Chief Caffeine Officer, where at an organization, you can invite me to just have conversations with your people, for coffee, conversation, and a boost. Because my background is so varied from an ideation point of view, from a humor point of view, from a coaching point of view.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just need a conversation to change the way they look at their lives.
Uh-huh.
There's the concept of a trim tab, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with the trim tab.
Nope.
I think Stephen Covey wrote about it. It's a small lever that controls a small rudder that controls the larger rudder that controls the direction of the entire boat or the ship.
Sure.
And a tiny little shift in that can change the entire direction of where you end up in your life. I would love to be able to have those kind of conversations with people, So, for example, one of the conversations I have, and I'll ask you this question, I know you're the interviewer though, is if you had, let's say you had $1 billion in the bank, Bill Gates kind of money, how would you spend your time? Not what would you buy, how would you spend your time? What's your answer to that question?
Well, freedom to do the things that I really wanted to do without worrying about the financial repercussions of that. So yeah, I'll be freed up. There'll be suddenly a whole lot of freedom to actually rethink.
But that's a generic answer. What would you actually do?
Well, for me personally, I do more of what I'm doing, and I'll go full on. It's suddenly like maybe there are no worries about any new initiative. You don't have to worry about how will this play out, etc., etc. The domain, the playground for me is going to remain pretty much the same, but it'll be far more aggressive, far more carefree, far more risk-taking, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, my memory is terrible, so bring me back to this because I have something to say about that.
Sure.
So normally if I ask a 23-year-old this question, he or she will say, oh, I'll travel. I said, okay, where will you go? I'll go to Europe. For how long? 1 month. When you actually do the mathematics, there used to be a book called Europe on $50 a day. It was a Trauma's Guide. What I'm trying to get them to is that the cost of your dreams is far lower than whatever imaginary number you may have in your head. The fact is we never do that mathematics. Right? So we keep thinking, oh, I'm going to work till the age of 50 or 40 or whatever it is, get so much money and then I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah, or we're conditioned to think like that, by parents and society and by the system. Even if we have the money to say, no, save it for a rainy day, too early for you. Yeah.
My follow-up question to that is, how much money do you need until you die? Right. So if I was to ask you that, the calculation I'd like you to do is calculate how much money you need until the day you die, account for inflation, holidays, children's education, the works, subtract what you already have, right? And you've got a balanced number. Divide that by the number of years you plan to work. Most people who do that calculation find out that they're working far harder than they need to work, and they're already earning more than they need to earn. Which brings you back to question one. Why are you then not living the life of your dreams?
Yeah, good mathematical logic there, although I'm pretty bad at mathematics, but yeah, I understand the logic.
But we're all chasing this definition of success that's defined by others. We're comparing ourselves with, oh, this guy's done so much, I should be trying to do as much. We waste our health trying to get this money, and then we spend all our money trying to regain our health.
Yep, which we can't do that. When we realize that, we're miserable.
And I'm going to come back to the point you mentioned about what you would do if you had $1 billion. And I think it's the same for every artist, right? We go through this process of evolution.
Yep.
So when we start, I want the confidence that I can make people laugh. I'll go for the easy joke. I'll go for the stereotype joke. Then there's observational comedy. Then we'll do stuff that makes us look cool or sound intelligent. You'll do or what's called edgy in comedy. You'll use bad language. You'll pick on positions of authority. But I think eventually the journey is inwards because both you and I operate in a profession where there are no rules, there are no boundaries, there are no guidelines. So you have to ask yourself, what are the things that I value? What are the things that I care about? What is my personality? We call that finding your voice.
Yep.
And then eventually your audience finds you. The people who don't like your stuff will weed themselves out automatically, because you're not pretending to be somebody else. Otherwise, you build an audience based on something that is not authentic. So I would argue, for somebody like yourself, you don't need the $1 billion to go all out or be more aggressive or do. That's who you are, and you're already in a place where you can do that. Let them celebrate the true you.
No, of course. I appreciate that. That's a valid point. But there is a sort of additional psychological security that comes with knowing having $1 billion in the bank that allows you. And as you rightly said, one can tap into that psychological safety way before even having the money in your bank account. It's more a mental block that we need to overcome in the process.
In fact, I would argue that the $1 billion may be more of a hindrance.
Well, if you let it,
yeah, you might lose that. I've seen so many people who lose that sense of hunger. In fact, I would say I'm an example of that. In my first 3 years, I did 700 shows. I was on the road every day. But now that I suppose life has got a little bit more comfortable, I'm picking and choosing. I'm aware of the fact that I'm in a comfortable position that allows me to take the kind of shows I want to take, allows me to experiment with leadership and comedy and combining the two and coaching, whereas I didn't have that luxury earlier. There were things that I had to do. So my growth rate was like this in the days of sort of hunger and poverty, whereas now it is definitely not at the same pace, because I'm like, nah, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Money, I believe, I've always believed, and invite your views on that as well, should be a liberating force. It should not tie you down. And ironically, that's what it ends up being a prison. And then you want to pass it on to the next generation. Many people do. Many miserable careers are created on the desire of the parents to say, listen, kid, I spent my entire life studying medicine. I built this hospital. Now it's running. So you got to be a doctor. Even if you want to be a cricketer, I don't care. You have to be a doctor, even if you'll be a miserable doctor for the rest of your life. And I think I like the logic there about that calculation that you probably overestimating what you need to live your dream.
In fact, you touched on something which I do want to add in, that in terms of, being able to follow my passion, like you mentioned, I was very fortunate because I have a set of parents who gave me everything and gave me nothing. Let me explain. They gave me everything in that the support systems were always there. Even as a kid, I remember my dad said, if you want to be a sweeper, you be a sweeper, but be the best in the world. We've all had parents who said that.
Sure.
But they always gave me a support system saying, go out, follow your heart, we've got your back. But when I say they gave me nothing, at no point did they ever try and manipulate me or channelize me saying, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a whatever it might be. Yes, it was always there saying you need to stand on your own feet and support yourself, which is why I said that bit about feeding the stomach. But if you can, I go and talk to young girls from underprivileged backgrounds in schools. And I tell them that financial independence is the only independence, So I was very fortunate to have parents who taught me the importance of financial independence and yet never tried to make me pursue a path that was a path of their dreams.
Sure.
So I think that was one of my, and has always been my biggest blessing.
Well, that's wonderful. And coming from my serious perspective about things, I think it was Carl Jung who said the biggest burden any child can carry are the unlived dreams of the parents. The biggest burden any child can carry are the unlived dreams of the parents. And yet so many young children that we see today are carrying those dreams, right? And as you rightly said, give them the liberty. As parents, we should give them the liberty to pursue what they want to pursue, right? Khalil Gibran said it beautifully. He said, your children are not your children. They're the sons and daughters of life itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. And this is the number one challenge with our system, is we sort of try to take over. Say, God, you did a wonderful job for the 9 months. in the womb, and now we'll take it over from here, and we know what's best for this child. What's your message to parents, CJ, who might be tuning in to help raise healthy, happy children? Because you're in the business of bringing smiles and uplifting humanity. Healthy, happy, not just successful.
I'm no expert on parenting, but what I will say is that I think what's very important is to always have clear communication. And in any relationship, I believe your relationship is always better when you focus more on listening than on talking.
Sure.
Because when you listen, you're able to understand who they are as human beings, what their hopes and dreams are. And it's also important not to instantly react, because when a parent instantly reacts to something that their child is saying, which the parent may not like, then the child immediately is on guard. And you never want to get your child into a position where they stop sharing with you.
Sure.
So I think that communication and transparency is always important. But again, I'm no expert in parenting, so I'm not really qualified to give advice.
No, coming
so the
from your
advice
experience.
I give is
coming from your experience, right?
Yeah.
Great. Let's go back to your journey in startup comedy and your first time on stage, which I believe, as you mentioned in your book, was end of October 2004, if I'm correct?
Absolutely right.
For the first time on stage. And your introduction, Malcolm Hardy was introducing you, saying the next guy is probably going to be shit. Please welcome Papa CJ.
So for starters, that was more a reflection of Malcolm Hardy than me. He was an infamous figure in the UK comedy circuit. He had gone to jail. He had done lots of things. He stole Freddie Mercury's birthday cake. He stole somebody's car. And that's how he introduced most acts. But yeah, back to your question. So sorry.
No. So were you nervous?
Of course. I mean, like they say, public speaking is one of the greatest fears in the world. And I was going up on stage on a boat called the Wibbly Wobbly boat on the River Thames,
right?
Which was famous for being a really rough night. And the UK comedy circuit, it's not like going to the theater where people watch and they smile and they clap. When you do gigs in pubs and boats, they are rowdy. They will heckle you. They will abuse you.
Right.
And this gig was known to be quite rough. But I think that first gig went quite well. And so here I am.
Yeah. And yet public speaking is the number one fear in the world, ahead of death. And some people would rather be dead than be on stage presenting to an audience. From your journey, what are your top insights into this and overcoming nervousness? And a lot of people are not able to live their full potential just because they're afraid of finding their voice or expressing themselves.
I think what's really important to understand, and you would have got this through my book Naked and the show as well, if you get a chance to see it, is I use the vehicle of my life, but I'm talking about the human experience.
Sure.
So when people are reading the book, just as it happened with you, they don't feel like I'm talking about just my life. It's like I'm talking about their life as well. Because there are so many shared experiences and emotions. We've all been through heartbreak. We've all been through failure. We've all been through various things. So I think it's important when you get on stage. I mean, the tips that I give people when you're giving a presentation, the greatest confidence booster is knowing that you have the ability to say, I don't know. If somebody asks you a question saying, I'm afraid, I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out and come back to you.
Sure.
Also, it's knowing that the people you're presenting to or performing in front of, they're human beings just like you. Everybody is flawed in some way or the other. And it's perfectly fine to make a mistake. Don't be afraid of being judged because none of us are perfect. And, there are various, the kind of tips that I give is, so one of the things is if I stood like really close to you, you'd be uncomfortable because, you'd feel that was your personal space.
Sure.
So one of the tips I do is, I'd say, just close your eyes and imagine what your personal space is. Then expand it and expand it and expand it until it fills the entire size of the whole room. Then when you walk on stage, you're going to walk in as if, in Hindi we have a saying which says, Mere Baap Ka Raj hai, which means, it's my father's kingdom. There was a there's a very old Bollywood film, a film in Indian cinema called Mughal-e-Azam, where there is one character who plays the emperor. And in those days, the shoes that were bought for him in that role cost 25,000 rupees.
Right.
In today's day and age, that would be equivalent to 2.5 million, 25 lakhs for those watching in India. Now the producer was asked. He said, do you really need to buy a pair of shoes for this character who's playing the emperor that costs that much? He says, no, I don't. But when that actor knows that he's wearing a pair of shoes that cost 25,000 rupees, the way he will walk, that is what I want to capture. So do you get that feel when you walk on stage with that presence and know that it's okay to be wrong? I never get on stage and say that this is what the answer is or this is what is correct. Right? I just get on stage and say, based on my experience, this is what I believe. I cannot possibly be wrong because I'm talking about my experience,
your experience
and what I have learned. It's not a blanket statement.
Right.
And the other one, if I'm allowed to say it, it's slightly naughty. If you want, you can edit it out. And this is more relevant for the women who are speaking than the men, is that confidence is like an orgasm. You can fake it. Most people don't know.
Right, but any tips on tapping into that space where you have the same swag and the same feeling of wearing the 25 lakh rupees shoes, or getting into that mental space? Do you have, what are CJ's top mental hacks before going on stage? Because you've been in a lot of firsts. You were the first Indian comic in the Melbourne Comedy Festival, Just for Laughs, Montreal, many other places across the world. You've been the first. Any favorite mental hacks before you go on stage?
I think just one, you should know the subject you're talking about. Two, you should know that it's perfectly okay to be wrong, or perfectly okay to slip up, mess up, and just enjoy yourself and be authentically you. Don't be there to impress, be there to express.
Sure.
Like they say, you shouldn't be there to prove yourself, but to improve yourself.
Wow, I love that.
If something goes wrong, just learn from it and be better the next time. Every speaking opportunity, everything is a learning opportunity. In my profession as a comedian, you learn nothing from success. You get on stage, you do a good show, you walk off thinking, boss, I'm the best. In a bad show, you get feedback every 15 seconds.
Right.
Every 15 seconds, you're judged. If they're not laughing, you're failing.
Right.
And there's nothing scarier, like you earlier said, than trying to make people laugh and getting 5 minutes of silence.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have the experience or the expertise to fix it, you have to ask yourself on the way home, if I'm ever again in front of a similar audience in the same country, what can I do differently so I don't look like a fool?
Sure.
And that is what helps you grow. So for us, failure is actually the only way to get better. Today, we have to keep failing in multiple different situations so you learn how to deal with those.
I agree with that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
I mean, today when I run a training session. It's one of my signature modules, which is called A Comedian's Guide to Communication Strategy.
Okay.
One of the things I talk about is that one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was starting out was that it's very important for you to grow in the dark, because when you hit the limelight, you don't have the freedom. You don't have the freedom to screw up.
Right. You can't make mistakes. Then they're very expensive mistakes.
He's so famous, and you go there and you're like, he's kind of okay.
Didn't live up to the expectations.
Now the problem is, if you always want to succeed, you keep playing safe. You keep doing the stuff that you know will always work. You don't innovate. You don't grow. So what do? We go to small open mic nights where there's 20 people in the audience, 30 people in the audience, unannounced. You'll take a piece of paper with 20 different new things. You'll try it out. You'll see what works. You'll see what doesn't work. And the stuff that works, you'll bring it in to your normal set.
Nice.
So the question I ask organizations or experienced professionals is, where is your open mic night? Where do you go to make your mistakes?
To innovate.
Where do you go to innovate, to experiment, to try different things? Which markets, which products, what do you want to try? And that is so important, because unless you sort of hit the gym, unless you practice, you're going to be no good at match time.
No, well said. Well said. I completely relate with that about the failures are the best teachers. We had an incident where back in the days when I was just starting out on this journey of being a trainer and speaker, etc., we had a request from a company to do a team building event. Now, we did not, we said yes to it. And that's my usual approach. If you don't know how to do something, say yes and figure out as you, because there's enough time in it. Yeah, right. But perhaps there was not enough time to figure it out, or we could not do the best we could have done in that time. Yeah. So, long story short, 40 people, international gathering, team building, full day events. We had some activities which more, sort of more intellectual, etc., did not have a lot of those hands-on, outdoor sort of team building activities. So 1 hour later into this event, I felt it's not working out, and I could sense it from the audience, and somehow managed to get through the day. Thankfully there was cricket outside, always cricket to fall back on. They had this. Yeah. It was in the JP Noida, some facility. They have a lot of outdoor sports there. So we sailed through the day somehow. I could still sense the discomfort from the audience. Came back that day. Next week itself, got this carpenter guy and looked up YouTube videos, created all this different sort of equipment for a variety of team building games, as a result of which we have not one but 20 activities, different takeaways to choose from. That one single incident taught us a lot. Yeah. Second thing you said about, that was beautiful, by the way. What's your open mic night? Where do you test ideas? And I think you talk about innovation and garages and startups, and they happen in a garage somewhere across the world. That's where a lot of the new ideas are coming from. And as you succeed, somehow you don't want to take a chance. You don't want to rock the boat. So you do more of what you've done, and that can be counterproductive when things change. Look at how this whole virtual medium has evolved, people doing virtual presentations and all that, changing with the times. So thank you for that. Very valuable. CJ, I'd like to again go back to your journey, because I think a lot of learning will emerge for our audience from the turning points. You enrolled for a course for stand-up comedy in September of that year, before you were to do your first gig. Most of your classmates, you write in your book, were young white men who were not so subtle when mocking you and hinting that they thought that you weren't funny and that you did not have any future in comedy at all. Mm-hmm. As fate would have it, none of those young men are in comedy business today, and you, my friend, represented India on international stages across the world. Now, two things. When that sort of, so you were obviously new, you're learning. When that sort of direct, not so subtle, hard-hitting negative feedback comes in, how do people deal with? What are your suggestions? How should people deal with that? That's one. And let's go with that first, and then.
I think each person has, their own approach. As a child, I was always a fan of Sachin Tendulkar, the cricketer, and he would have, opponents sort of try and mock him or, egg him on, and he let his bat do the talking. So for me, I just put my head down and did my work. Also, I was the only Indian comedian in all of the UK.
Right.
I hadn't grown up there. I didn't follow their politics. I didn't have the same cultural references.
Right, of course.
And, sometimes people spoke to me and said, hey, why do you talk about being Indian? People are going to pigeonhole you and call you the Indian comedian. But my point of view was that if I don't talk about my country and my people and bring my perspective, then what's going to make me different? Because that's who I am.
Sure.
And for me, it was very important to talk about that. And the other thing I also did very consciously was that often people from my country and I won't say community, but Indians were mocked. They were viewed as the news agent or the taxi driver, and you thought you could
7-Elevens and
you thought you could always stereotype them and make fun of them. And I used to always try and represent my country in a positive light.
Right.
And when I was heckled by a table of skinhead football hooligans, I made sure that I found the biggest guy in that group And I literally destroyed him in front of all his friends and 200 other people in that comedy club, with the hope that the next time he walked on the street and he saw an Indian guy, he would think twice before, passing a racist remark or mocking that person.
Wow. Now, that's a good take at it. Fight back and stand up for what you believe in. Let your bat do the talking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just put your head down and work. And I think it's really important to not let your ego get ahead of your talent. If you can be humble and kind to people and, be able to weed out the feedback as to who's doing it from a negative point of view. But if there is any truth behind it, what can you learn from it so you can improve and grow?
Sure.
I remember when I was in the UK, I did about, like I said, 700 shows in 3 years. 400 of them would have been out of London. And I was always the new guy at these shows, but I was in the car with 2 other comedians who had been doing it for between 10 and 20 years. I saw how they prepared their shows. I saw how they analyzed it afterwards. I begged them to watch me perform and give me feedback afterwards. I've spent over 2,000 hours in cars with comedians who have been doing stand-up comedy for between 10 and 20 years. That was comedy university for me. I was literally just soaking it in and soaking it in.
Learning from all these people.
Learning and literally begging, saying, please teach me, please give me feedback. I would go to a room, perform, not be able to handle it, and then watch how these guys would enter the same room and be able to take charge. There is no substitute for that kind of learning. So I think it's very important to just always keep your ego in check, be humble, realize that even when people lash out at you, sometimes, you don't know what their experience is.
Sure.
So maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're going through stuff.
Of course.
If there is something to it, take it on board, learn from it and grow. But sometimes the other guy is just destroy him.
No, grow through what you go through. You've been a testimony of that. And then, you did very well for yourself in the UK, in terms of you had this identity and you were performing shows back to back and then relocating back to India. Talk to us about that. How did this affect your journey? And as you look back at it, what are your thoughts? Because there's a lot of nostalgia about the UK that I can sense in the conversation that we've had so far. And how does that fit in?
See, there's a nostalgia about the UK because I learned my craft there. So my style of comedy is also very British. And the beautiful thing about comedy in the UK is that it is a way of life. There are some cultures. So in the West Coast in the US, it's a means to an end. I'm going to do some stand-up, I'll get noticed, and then I'll get on TV or I'll get a film or a sitcom.
Right.
Whereas in the UK, live comedy, people do comedy for the sake of doing live comedy. Every city or town has a comedy club. So I think that's really, that was wonderful, which is why I'm nostalgic about the UK. And I'm still passionate about the live art form. I don't do much stuff online and, I don't think it makes sense to leave the corporate world, join a creative field, and then be in a rat race in the creative field. I'm very happy that other people are doing what they're doing. I wish them all the success. But I'm going to do the things that I enjoy doing. With regard to moving back to India, I'm doing a session quite soon on leadership without a title.
Right.
And one of the questions that I'm being asked is about, where are moments that you have really demonstrated your leadership? But I believe that leadership is the management of energy. And more than anybody else's, it starts with you, with managing your own energy. It's leadership by example.
Sure.
And a lot of that is about living a life that is true to your values, whatever they might be. So when I moved back to India, I had just gone to the US, done this huge TV show called Last Comic Standing. 15 million people, I think, had watched it. I had a work permit to work in the US. This was a big break. But I had just moved back to India after 8 years of being in the UK. I wanted to be home. I'm very Indian. This is my home. I wanted to be close to my family.
Sure.
My father hadn't been keeping well. And that is what was more important to me. So I think as human beings, we have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership every day by being true to our values. And for me, that was important. And I remember when I moved back to India, There was no English language stand-up comedy in the way that I had been practicing it. But I said, no problem, yeah, I'll start the circuit. So I started off the English language comedy circuit in Delhi.
Right.
And I supported that ecosystem until it, had enough steam to run on its own. And slowly things picked up. But also, I think coming back to India was wonderful for me as a comedian because, like I said earlier, when I performed in the UK, I hadn't grown up there. I didn't have the same cultural references.
Sure.
So I was telling jokes, I was like, here's a joke, here's a joke, here's a joke, and almost at some level, there was a sense at least in the very early days, you want them to like you, So
right.
like, here's my joke, please like me, and you speak in an accent that is comfortable for them to understand.
Right.
But when I came to India, this is a country I've grown up in. So now I can do 45 minutes on stage without telling one pre-planned or pre-written joke. It's just conversations
Effortless.
with the audience. And so when I came back to India, here I was performing in front of my people. And it made me a lot more fluid as a comedian. It taught me how to be more conversational and fluid as a performer. And then I was able to take that craft and take it beyond my borders. So now when I go back to the UK I've performed in 25 different countries.
Right.
I am able to have that same level of fluidity as a performer, which is something that India gave me.
That spontaneity, perhaps, and that there's so much. There's movies, there's culture, popular culture that we grew up in. There's politics. There's so many things that would not need any effort at all when you're speaking to a home audience, right?
But I think more than the actual content, Simerjeet, it was the comfort with uncertainty.
Right.
Crowd work is something that is very difficult to do.
Sure.
Because unlike
you can't prepare for that, right?
Yeah, unlike a joke where I'm going to say these lines and they're going to laugh, with crowd work, you have a conversation. Somebody says something, you've got to instantly make it funny on the spot.
Right,
you know? That's very difficult. And I think a large part of life, when I coach as well, there's a principle called confident uncertainty, right? Life is always going to be uncertain.
Confident uncertainty.
It's always going to throw things at you that you're not expecting.
Right.
But you need to be able to carry yourself with the confidence that, no matter what comes my way, I'm going to be able to deal with it.
Very good. Very good. Like that.
So, yeah.
CJ, help us with the creative process, please. When you write your jokes or when you're visualizing being on that stage, when you're thinking, you're sort of anticipating, I'll say this and this is what the reaction is going to be like, or this is how I'd like the reaction to be. And, so you write it down. Do you rehearse it? What's the writing process? With the perspective of helping our viewers and listeners be more creative in their communication in order to connect with other people better.
I think, again, it comes down to, like I mentioned earlier, listening and observing.
Okay.
There are some people, so Jerry Seinfeld, for example, would sit down every day in front of a pad and paper and write for 3 hours, and something will come out. I don't have that level of discipline. Okay. But I'm always paying attention to things that are going on around me. If I see something that has the potential to be funny or there's an idea, I will immediately write it down. And then one day I'll sit down with these 50 ideas and try and turn them into jokes. Again, you don't know what's going to work until you take it onto stage.
Sure.
So take it onto stage, see what works. If it doesn't work, try it differently, play with the idea. And also I think it's really important not to make yourself fit a box, right? I'm not a comedian. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not an author. I'm Papa CJ, right? And that encompasses all of it. I remember when I did my show Naked for the first time, 20 minutes in that are deadly serious and serious to the point that people are in tears when they watch it. They're deeply emotional bits. And I remember somebody telling me, saying, what's wrong with you? You're a comedian. How can you do this stuff?
Right.
And I fortunately did not listen to them. And the greatest strength of that show is not the comedy. I mean, a lot of it is funny, but is that emotional roller coaster that the audience goes through. And you'll get a feel for that from the book which you've already read.
Right.
So I don't think you should be pressured to meet the expectations of outsiders.
Right.
If you can be authentic to yourself and give them a genuine experience, that audience doesn't need to agree with you, but they need to be able to relate to where you're coming from.
Right.
So you need to just build that bridge and you're home safe. So I would say the two things, when you're presenting or talking or mapping out your journey, you've always got to think in advance two things. One is, firstly, why should they give a crap? Why does that audience in front of you care about what you have to say? We live in a world of limited attention spans, right? Why should they spend their time listening to me? So what's in it for them? And the second thing you need to outline, and I'm sure you do this as a motivational speaker, is at the end of their interaction or experience or presentation or show with you, what do you want them to think, feel, or do as a result? So for me, it's very important that I know the feeling I want to leave them with.
Right.
How do I want them to feel at the end of this experience?
Sure.
So that's important for me. And when you can put others first and care about the things that they care about, it's going to come back to you.
And then, and the spotlight is on them, isn't it? More than about proving yourself, and you're way more comfortable in your own skin. And it's not about you. You're not there to prove anything. You're there to serve. And as you rightly said, you have that in mind. Is what's the end feeling? Do I want them to introspect? Do I want to leave them on a high? Do I want them to rethink their life and their priorities? That all helps to keep things on track.
I would even rephrase slightly. Is that, yes, there are all these questions about what I want them to do or may not want them to do. But the more important question is, what do they want? What do they need? What's going to make their life better or happier? Or
Right. That's where your research comes in beforehand.
When I perform in a new country, if I go to Singapore, I will tell the promoter to keep the last 10 days worth of newspapers. I'll read up about their history, their politics, their news, their recent scandals. I will talk to locals, to taxi drivers, to find out their point of view on all these things. And my first 10 minutes is purely about them. And from their point of view, they're like, oh, he's talking about things that matter to us.
Right. He's not an outsider anymore, so he's one of us. He knows what's going on.
He's made the effort to understand the things that I care about. I did a show recently, a private event in Goa for about 70 people. I did 40 minutes of material purely about them. I knew every single person in the group, what their issues were, I'm doing a show for another organization quite soon. I know about the entire top management. I know more about their business than they know about their business.
Wow.
Because I've spent 8 hours just talking to people in the company and finding out. So that's what makes it unique and special, because it's about them and not about you.
And I think that underlines the fact that there are no shortcuts. People have this misconception that, there's probably a shortcut to public speaking somewhere, or CJ was always this spontaneous and had a sharp observation, the gift of the gab, as they say. There's a lot of hard work, as you said, behind the scenes going on, trying to understand, putting them first, learning about their world, and then proceeding from that. And this is where most of the people who want to improve their public speaking or influencing or leadership skill, this is where they fail. They sort of, they overlook this step.
What tends to happen now with social media is, people create a 5-minute clip. It goes viral on the internet.
Right.
You get, let's say, 10 million views, and you're in a position to fill up a 1,000-seater auditorium.
Right.
And people come in to watch you. But then what do you do? 5 minutes on the internet is not going to teach you how to hold a live audience for an hour.
Absolutely.
So it's very
because
important.
You've not been in that position. Right.
It's very important to learn the trade before you learn the tricks of the trade.
Well said.
And people are trying to learn the tricks of the trade first.
That's shortcuts all the time, and they sell. Shortcuts sell. Talk about a weight loss pill today will help people lose weight without going to the gym, without exercising, without dieting, and you'll have lots of takers for that, right? Yeah. We live in a world where people are drawn to shortcuts, but there are none. Thank you for that. And then what led you into motivational speaking? What was because into executive coaching? I understand that you were doing some work side by side with stand-up comedy as well? You were doing executive coaching parallel to that?
What led me to executive coaching was poverty.
That's an honest answer.
Because I was completely broke. I joined this recruitment firm in London. So I used to work in the day and perform at night. It supported my comedy. And then one of my clients was a company that did executive coaching. So I qualified as a coach with them. And I would just say, I'm free on so-and-so days, get me work. And they would say, okay, Google wants to run this workshop in Ireland. Nike wants to run this in Amsterdam. So with them, I've trained all these companies all over the world. Right. And I found that it was really interesting because in stand-up comedy, you're the star, you're standing in front. But in coaching, they're the stars. And it's your job to serve. The less you speak, the more successful the session is.
Absolutely.
And I really started enjoying that as well. And then over the course of time, I found that I was able to create my own content, which combined the two worlds. Because there is so much you can bring from comedy, which teaches you about, which brings you skills and points of view that are valuable in business. And vice versa. There's stuff from business that you can apply in comedy as well.
Right. Really would love to hear about that a little bit as we move forward.
Yeah. I mean, everything. It's, marketing, branding. I mean, from a business point of view to comedy, there are so many other things you learn. I remember in comedy, one of the things I learned, which is valuable in business, is that you are super hot for the 20 minutes after you've nailed the gig. I remember in the UK, it used to take 6 months before you could get a booking for a show because there were so many new comedians who wanted that slot. But if I had a good show, I would immediately go to the promoter that night after the show saying, when can I get another slot in? Right. Because he's got that memory of you in his head. I would call him the next morning and book a slot in the diary. So even when I've come back to India, I do a corporate show and I'll stick around afterwards. I'll meet the audience, I'll talk to them. I remember I did a show in Mumbai once and I came home and in my pocket, I had the business cards of 35 CEOs. And I remember thinking as a consultant, I would have chopped an arm off for this kind of networking. Right. But as a comedian, people were literally just giving it to me.
Sure.
And almost all my work I've got is from people who have seen me at shows.
Right.
So I think that's something to keep in mind that, when you do a piece of work for a client, can you follow up as soon as possible to try and get in that next piece of work?
To build on that success.
Because in that moment, they realize, the value that you bring to the table.
Sure. And why is business, have you helped business folks loosen up a little bit? Why is this supposed to be all serious? Especially, especially here in India, sometimes we take things very, very seriously. And that's considered to be sort of the benchmark of, being a good leader or a good boss or a good employee. And,
Yeah, I think that's something that really needs to change, I think people are now starting to realize that you need to have fun at work. Mental health is a big issue.
Right.
And especially with the pandemic and people working from home, they're working 24 hours.
Right.
And people are now starting to really realize the value of humor. And also humor is an invaluable tool when it comes to leadership. Humor can help you charm and disarm. It can help you with negotiation. It can help you with relationships. It can help you with leading your team. It shows humility if you can use some self-deprecating humor.
Right.
That being said, the research shows that it's slightly different for men than it is for women.
Really?
Unfortunately, it's sad to see. Because when men make fun of themselves, they use self-deprecating humor in the workplace, they are seen as more powerful and more humble. Whereas with women who make fun of themselves, they're seen as undermining themselves. At least that's what the research shows. I don't believe it. I think if somebody has the ability to laugh at themselves, that's the kind of person I want to spend time with.
It's a superpower, man, isn't it? In today's world where everybody's so careful about, their self-image and every selfie on Instagram is so carefully put together with all the filters. It's a superpower to be yourself, to laugh at yourself. Yeah. And thanks to people.
So it's a big challenge. You're absolutely right. The problem with all this social media is people are starting to get their sense of self-worth from external validation.
Absolutely.
And that's a very dangerous place to let your emotions and your mood and your everything be in the hands of somebody else.
Right.
You see teenagers in schools where how many likes, how many comments. And one needs to be very careful of that.
That's a benchmark of popularity now these days among teenagers, is then they go to whatever lengths they have to ensure that popularity, which is very, very dangerous, I believe, from these social media things. But glad to have people like you, especially this crossover from comedy into the business world, because I'm no stand-up comedian myself, but I've had situations in live presentations when there is something funny, obviously. They can, the punchline of a story or something that happened in the business world, and people they're looking at each other for cues as if, are they going to laugh? If they laugh, I'll laugh too. Or is the boss going to laugh? If the boss laughs, we'll laugh too. Or is the expat in the room laughing about this? If the expat laughs, everybody's like, okay, this is funny, right? And we need...
So I've got to tell you this, every single corporate show that I'm invited for, before the show, I'm told this is what our brand stands for. This is what our values are. You need to do a clean show. It's got to be, nothing. Mm-hmm. You get there on the day and everybody has 2 drinks and they want the naughty stuff.
Masala.
Right? But the masala as they call it. But if something goes wrong, you have to take the blame. So there is a level of psychological gamesmanship that takes place. So I'll give you an example. I was doing a show for Tata Consultancy Services many years ago, maybe a decade ago. They had called 300 CIOs. So I got on stage and I said, listen, I'm here on behalf of TCS. They understand their brand, but I understand human behavior.
Right.
Now, if you can understand that Papa CJ is completely separate to the TCS brand, I can give you a slightly naughtier show. Give me a cheer if you want a clean show, complete silence.
Okay.
Give me a cheer if you want a naughty show, 300 people cheer.
All right. These are
then
CIOs.
I look at the client. Then I look at the most senior-most person in the client. I said, sir, what do you suggest we do? He says, well, you give them what they want. The brand is safe. The audience gets what they want. I can do what I want.
You're still not safe.
Everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. No. And also there's no recordings allowed of the show. So there's no evidence.
Fair enough that you said it. Okay. That's clever. That's the right way to do it. Wonderful. It's been a fantastic conversation here, CJ. Virtual high five to you, my friend. Thank you so much for being so open and about your journey. Any parting words of wisdom, inspiration for especially for our young audiences who feel they're stuck and, there's no opportunities. I need to be someplace else, doing something else in order to discover my best. And what are the main lessons from your life journey? Life full of risks and trying out all these crazy things. What would you like to say?
So before any parting words, I will say this. Firstly, thank you so much for having me here. And I really appreciate the fact that you have made the effort to read my book and do the research to make this a meaningful conversation.
A wonderful book, by the way, guys. Wonderful book.
I think that is something that everybody watching should learn from. That it's not just 2 guys chatting, but there's a lot of work that goes behind it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any parting words of wisdom? Not really, I think just live your life to the fullest. If you're ever in a stressful situation, think about yourself 40 years from now on your deathbed and ask yourself, will this stressful situation really matter? I think in 90% of cases, you'll find the answer to that is no. And for me, I've always believed that relationships are what matter the most. Almost all of our greatest regrets are that we didn't get to spend enough time with the people we loved.
Sure.
So, cherish those moments while you have them. And as cliche as the saying might be, don't let the world change your smile. Let your smile change the world.
Wow.
So be good to people, be nice to people, be a good human being. And I strongly believe in karma. If you can seek out opportunities to do good for others and make their lives better, it will come back to you one way or the other.
Wow. आप तो serious हो गए यार सच में.
Closing words.
No, I love that. And I've lived that message. I believe in it. That if you ask the universe, if you ask the world, how can I serve? There are forces in return which will ask you, how can we serve you? And that sort of amazing magic will happen in your lives. You're a wonderful human being, my friend, a ray of hope for many, and a living example of not to take yourself or your life too seriously. Go out and live the dream. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Simar. All the best.
Cheers, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.